So I think we're ready to get started. For all participants, very good afternoon if you're calling from the East Coast. Still a very good morning if you're calling from the West Coast. We're super excited to be hosting today's session, which actually marks session number 5 that we have been jointly presenting as Verisk Marketing Solutions and PX. My name is Bas Alfers. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at PX, and I am stoked to introduce Ryan Johnson today, who heads up the product that we'll talk a little bit further about at Verisk Marketing Solutions. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to today's webinar.
Hey, boss. Great to be here. Thanks, guys. Excited to do the talk with you today. Just as a little background about myself, I'm the Senior Product Manager for TCPA Guardian, which is the one-to-one consent solution we'll be talking about today in partnership with PX, and I work for Verisk Marketing Solutions.
Amazing. And as I mentioned, today's session marks the 5th session. We've done 4 sessions so far, 4 sessions that had a total of over 1,300 registrants. So we're super excited to actually continue these sessions today. Let me jump to the next slide. And maybe I can just get a little bit of a thumbs up from everyone to make sure that I'm sharing my right screen from my end. Ryan and Michele, you guys are seeing the right slides?
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. So we've had 4 sessions earlier this year, which were very theoretical in nature that we've done so far. Today's session will actually be much more pragmatic, where we're going to talk about what we've seen in terms of adoption, and most importantly, where the new compliance regulations are with all the information that we have today and the solutions that we're providing within the market. As you might recall, we had 4 different sessions that marked the introduction of the FCC regulations that will go into effect in January 27th, where Michele joined us. We had 2 brands that spoke about the expectations from their end in terms of how one-to-one consent will evolve with these new regulations. We talked about a high-level introduction on the solutions that both VMS and PX will provide, and then we had a Q&A session as well. Again, very much like from a expectation level that we've had before. Well, today we'll talk more about where we see the market is today. This is part of a 3-session webinar series. Today is marking where we are today, what the solutions are that both companies are providing, and from there on, we're going to do 2 other sessions. One session where we have lead sellers that talk about implementations that they've done so far, the adoption that they have done from their end. In terms of one-to-one consent, we'll have one strategic key publisher in the Medicare industry, and we have another company that's joining from different verticals. That's in 3 weeks from now. And in 2 weeks after that, December 10th, we'll have a session where brands are talking about the solutions that they're using today and their expectations going to January from a brand level point of view. Introduction in terms of today's agenda. I'm going to, shortly after this, I'm going to introduce you all to Michele Schuster, who is going to take us actually through the lay of the land of where the compliance is today, what everyone should be taking into account, getting ready for the one-to-one regulations. I'll share where PX is today in terms of our solution that we've deployed into the market and the adoption of our solution. And Ryan will do the same thing from the VMS point of view. And then we'll talk a little bit about why our solutions are working so well hand in hand together, and some of the expectations in terms of what we expect to see in the next 30 days or so from further adoption in the space. Now, the why are we doing this today? Why do we feel it's actually so necessary to do another webinar series? The main reason is because there's still a lot of uncertainty, and we try to solve for such uncertainty with the updates that we'll be sharing in today's session. A majority, or close to majority, I should say, of respondents of a survey that we've done shortly state that they're still unsure how to implement solutions for one-to-one consent or how it's impacting their business. So we feel it's very important from both VMS and PX point of view to share what we're seeing, to share best practices, and go from there, obviously, to provide solutions to tackle some of these unknowns. Quick reminder. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. We have a moderator that will filter out the right questions if we have time for it to address, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. If we don't get to your question, don't worry. We'll make sure that we're following up afterwards, either on a quick one-to-one chat, little joke, or as a central email with some updates from our end. But without further ado, let me give a quick reintro to how it's stated so beautifully on the title slide here, the all-star of our webinar series, Michele Schuster. Michele, maybe you can give a quick intro from your end and then take it away with the content that you would love to provide us with today.
Sure, sure. I think I know most of the people that are on this call. I feel like I know most of the people of the industry after being in it for so many years. But I started out on the regulator side as the consumer protection chief in the Ohio Attorney General's office. And from there started to help companies comply with, and when I started, it was the do not call regulations, which I can tell you, everybody came to our office and said it would be the end of telemarketing. It was not. Just like one-to-one consent in these new regulations is not going to be the end of lead generation or telemarketing. So we have a long history of being resilient, and I have no doubt that that will continue. And to this day, still working with companies to find practical risk-based solutions on how to comply with this ever-evolving regulatory landscape. And thank you, Boss and Ryan, for having me again today. Can we not show those pictures anymore, by the way? I'm not fond of them.
There's a picture where I actually look so much in love, which my team loves resharing on the slide, which we should not use again. So I agree. I agree.
So we have a disclaimer whenever we're giving webinars that we are not providing legal advice. Definitely consult your attorney. The situations are always so specific. It's a bad idea to take general guidance from attorneys on webinars. All right, so let's talk about these new TCPA, which they don't feel so new anymore. It feels like we've been talking about, what, for 10 months now about these regulations. I will tell you, though, every day I am talking to new companies that are finding creative ways to meet these new requirements. And these new requirements, as we all know, are requiring that we get consent for certain types of telephone calls. And those are telephone calls using what I call regulated technology, so we don't have to continually say ATDS, automatic telephone dialing system, pre-recorded messages, and AI. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the types of calls that need prior express written consent. And those are generally marketing calls that we're talking about. And what was the new aspect of this is that for a long time, we had one consumer too many marketers through that consent funnel. And now it's one-to-one, one consumer to one company. There is a limited exception that we'll talk about, but also, and this one I think is a result of some of the things that we heard from especially the Federal Trade Commission about getting leads from web pages that were no way related to the calls that were subsequently made to the consumers. They were incentivized leads, sweepstakes, those types of things that they saw as problematic for the types of leads. I will say there are ways that you can do those using those types of channels, but you got to make sure that the consumer understands what they're going to get telephone calls about after filling out the forms. The effective date is January 27th. I will tell you, everybody I'm talking about is already working on their solutions for this, because lead forms are no longer good after 127 if you're using regulated technology and not following the logically and topically one-to-one consent. All right, so I like to think in terms of diagrams. I think a lot of people do. This I'm not really going to go through, except to say that we're talking about the PEWC, the prior express written consent. And so if you follow that down, that tells you where you're going to need it. And basically, it's calling wireless telephone numbers for telemarketing. You're going to need prior express written consent if you're using the regulated technology. And for landlines, also needing prior express written consent. I would print this out, put it on your desk, and use it for whenever you're talking to people about what type of consent they're going to need for calls. It goes through do not call as well, and you can always get an update on our website, mslawgroup.com, of this chart. All right, so what's not permitted for one-to-one consent? Multiple sellers in a lead form. It's very much that simple. It is one consumer giving consent to one company. I will tell you the FCC did say that you could put multiple sellers in one lead form provided the consumer had to individually select which companies you were giving consent to. And generally, those have to be logically and topically related also to the content of that web page. What's a little bit concerning for a lot of, especially the larger companies, is the FCC didn't really give any guidance on affiliated companies. And as we know, as you're working with the larger clients, they have individualized companies within large corporations. And so working with your clients that are larger with multiple affiliated companies and making sure you're getting the right type of consent for them will be really critical. So make sure you're having those conversations and finding a way to cover all the affiliates. Logically and topically, they didn't provide, and they being the FCC, didn't give much guidance at all. It's kind of one of those things where I think they got into a room and said, well, they'll know it when they see it. And that's not terribly helpful when you're a company trying to comply with these new regulations. But again, for me, when it comes to consumer protection types of laws, which is what the TCPA is, it always has to do what the reasonable consumer would expect when filling out these forms. Put yourself in their shoes. Does this web page relate to that? One of the examples that the FCC gave that it would not is if a consumer was on a car loan comparison shopping website. They would not be giving consent for loan consolidation, even though in our minds we might think, well, they're both related to loans, and maybe if they consolidated their loans, they'd get a better car loan. FCC said, no, it really has to be specifically, logically, and topically related to that. This is a case that recently dealt with that. E-sign, one of the things that has been surprising recently was, and also with the order, because in the order, the FCC said, if you are required to comply with e-sign, meaning that you are providing electronic disclosures, and those are the TCPA disclosures that they're providing, consent for marketing calls and all of the other things that we've been talking about, and you're using an electronic means, which is a website, primarily is what we're talking about, that you need to comply with e-sign. And previously, they had provided guidance that you could do that through a voice recording where the consumer would provide affirmative consent. Well, subsequently, there was a case, Bradley versus Dental Plans, that came out in the spring that said you cannot get e-sign consent in a recorded voice call, where the FCC had specifically given that as an example that you could. And that's because under e-sign, you have to give the e-sign disclosures that you're agreeing to give electronic consent to the disclosures that are provided electronically. And you have to give those in writing. You can't give those electronically. And that's what you would be doing on a voice recording. And so definitely talk to your attorneys if you are looking to get consent over a voice recording. I think there are ways you could do it. You probably have to do something contemporaneously through email or text or something like that, but there are likely ways to do it, but be cautious of that. Something else I just wanted to point out, because we've been talking about this for a long time, so let's throw something new in here. The FCC has recently come out with 2 additional orders, one around artificial intelligence. And so they clarified that AI is an artificial pre-recorded voice. I don't think that was a surprise to any of us in the industry, but they have made it very clear. Also, they came out with a revocation of consent order. And this is something that we need to start paying attention to, because it affects whether you have consent for certain types of calls after a consumer has revoked consent. And so specifically, the FCC has said that if a consumer makes a request for a do not call request, and regardless of whether they do it over text or telephone, it applies to both. So make sure that you are capturing that. Also, if a marketing campaign opt-out occurs, it doesn't constitute an opt-out for the non-marketing, the informational type of calls and texts that could occur. But if it's a non-marketing campaign opt-out, that does apply to marketing. So all of that is a mouthful, but all of that to say that our CRMs need to be able to capture this, and we need to train our agents about accepting these types of revocations of consent and how you're going to disposition that for purposes of your suppression lists and do not call. So be aware of that and make sure you're talking to your attorney about that.
So first of all, Michele, thank you so much for laying it out so clearly. I think these were some of the clearest slides that I've seen in a long time, and definitely.
Well, that's not good since I've done this 2 other times, boss, but okay.
We're getting better at this, the webinars that we go through. I have a question with something that's popping up a lot, and you refer to regulated technology. Regulated technology being either AI, pre-recorded messages, or an ATDS. I think there's been a lot of chatter around what is considered an ATDS. We know it's a dialing system that can store or randomly make phone calls to random phone numbers, I should say, to sequential phone numbers. What is your recommendation or advice for companies that are seeking advice to know if they actually are using an ATDS today, if they're using a dialer? Because there's a lot of different dialers in the industry that are being used, from power dialers, regulated dialers, but also a whole schema that's in between. I'm hearing a lot of companies that are stating they're using a progressive dialer, for example. What is your recommendation to find out for companies that are on this call to know if they actually are using an ATDS?
So I would get an opinion from your dialer company. Most of the dialer companies out there have legal opinions about whether their dialer is or is not an ATDS, because this is not a question you want to be asking after a lawsuit has been filed or even after a demand has been made. So make sure you have that proof in hand, get it from your dialer. I mean, I thought, didn't we resolve this question with Facebook versus Duguid? And nothing is an ATDS, right? Unfortunately, courts have gotten a little creative here recently, and they're really looking at what type of random and sequential number generation capability a dialer has. And, we're only really looking at motions to dismiss, which the courts has to take all facts as true that are presented in order to not have that case dismissed, basically. And so we have courts looking at facts and not really looking at whether a random and sequential number generator has been used to generate the actual telephone numbers. But is looking at, well, there was a pause before the phone was answered. Well, that's not part of the definition, but they're saying, well, that means that it could be an ATDS. So you really just have to be careful. You have to have something that you are capable of presenting at the demand phase to make these go away before a lawsuit ever gets filed, and work with your dialing company on that, or work with your attorney to get one from them about the dialer that you are using.
Michele, I've got a question for you.
Uh-oh.
We're seeing that some brands are requiring one-to-one consent and moving full steam ahead, and others aren't. What can we expect the future of lead forms to look like?
Well, I should say, first of all, everybody should be looking at this, not just for the prior express written consent for regulated technology, but even your do not call consent. So everybody should be taking a look at this. We know that plaintiffs' attorneys are chomping at the bit for January 27th. There are going to be a lot of filings after that. And so most of the companies I know are already working on this. They're doing A/B testing. They're seeing what's going to work. They're getting opinions from their attorneys. They're trying out alternatives, and that's really where everybody should be in this space right now. If you're burying your head in the sand, then January 27th is going to come real quick, and I suspect that the biggest pushback will be from the lead purchasers. More so even than regulators or lawsuits. They're asking these questions already. How are you preparing for January 27th?
Amazing. Thank you for sharing and answering both of those questions, Michele. So I think that's a perfect segue in terms of where we want to go next and talk a little bit about the solutions from a compliance point of view that both PX and Verisk Marketing Solutions are providing today. And I'll kick it off talking a little bit about PX's solution. We've talked about brand explicit consent for a few webinars now. We've rolled this out to the majority of our verticals, but I wanted to start actually by taking a look back and state how we've designed our solution, because I think this is very important to think about as a brand, but also as a lead seller. There's been a lot of talk since mid last year already, and I'm talking about 18 months ago, how this can actually be implemented from an easy and fast solution, fast in terms of consumer experience. So one of the requirements in terms of our pillars was that this should be easy to implement for both parties involved, for lead sellers and lead buyers, and should be speedy. It should be very, very quick in terms of what the solution actually is. Secondly, we believe that brands should take more control of the information that's being provided for an opt-in. And our core focus within our brand explicit consent solution today allows brands to do that. And I'll show that in the next slide what I mean with that. But we will allow brands to fully manage their branding, including logo, including unique TCPA, including description of the brand that's being shown, and make real-time changes across lead sellers where this is rolled out today. The third one is advanced one-to-one matching. And it's actually very important to highlight this, because in the next session for our webinar, I bet we're going to talk a little bit more about this. One of the biggest challenges that we face today for lead sellers in our industry is low acceptance rates. When a lead is being generated and is being attempted to be sold, a lot of brands today reject that lead because it's a duplicate lead, because it's a current customer, because it could be on a DNC list, or whatever validation rules that could be deployed. Our solution allows lead sellers to collect as much information and make sure that there is a 100% or close to 100% matching capability that we're offering to brands. The last one is probably the most important one, is to provide a better consumer experience. And that goes obviously with the speed, that goes in terms of presenting the brand, but it's something that we often forget. So for us, these are the 4 pillars how we've provided our solution. And in previous webinars, we showed how the solution can be deployed. I wanted to keep it very simple on today's solution and what we're seeing most companies are doing. And the way how I'm doing that is by showcasing 3 brands. I think 3 brands that many companies know in the space that are live on home security. And these are just as a representation and an example. These are not live examples, I should say, as a disclaimer. What the matching capabilities of PX allow to lead sellers to do is an API request that requests all the information of matching brands for that particular consumer. And as I mentioned, the more information that's being collected, the more accurate the targeting filters can be applied. And that means that if you can actually collect a phone number, an email address information whatsoever, the more likely the solution can be offered towards the lead seller where that lead will be sold. In this case, you see the most simplistic way, I think, how we're thinking about brand explicit consents to be rolled out. This is not the only way. We'll talk about the different ways, again, that we see in the industry in the next session. One of them being actually an exclusive TCPA, where there's just one brand being mentioned in TCPA. But I think this is the cleanest to provide the consumer today with the different options. What our solution allows to do is actually pass back multiple data fields. And those include the logo, those include the brand name, a custom brand description, and a custom TCPA to make it as clear for the consumer to provide the full opt-in. It's up to lead sellers to decide how they actually want to implement this from a graphical point of view, from a workflow point of view. We're actually appending more data points today in addition to these 4. But it's the most cleanest way that we envisioned to provide an opt-in to consumer. From our point of view, it's very important that these brands are being passed if there's intermediaries that are involved in a transparent way, meaning that if there are aggregators or brokers in between a process of a lead seller and a lead buyer, it's important that those brands are being passed for the brands that are requiring one-to-one consent. We're allowing for publishers and lead sellers to implement this particular solution in a lot of different ways, meaning in a lot of different workflows from APIs that we have live, in a lot of different scenarios from an exclusive lead point of view, where you only have one TCPA with the brand name listed, where you have the select boxes as I showed in the previous example, or even within sequential offerings where a consumer can go through a flow and select different brands. As I mentioned as well, the more data that's being provided on the matching request, the more accurate the matching that can be done. We stimulate and we ask brands that want to tap into the brand explicit consent solution to provide as many data points to make sure that they would accept the lead. And if that means that they can share a current customer list through PX, that allows us to obviously not show a matched particular brand when the consumer is already a customer today, when that matching process can take place. In addition to that, validations can already be provided in such a request. And also through PX, we have various brands that are using retention campaigns in order to tap into this. Long story short, I think if you go back to session number 3, we talk a little bit more about how this is implemented. But today what we're seeing is that this is the #1 way how lead sellers are implementing one-to-one consent through our PX brand explicit consent.
Thanks, Boss. So for those of you that are in attendance and know Verisk Marketing Solutions, this might be a little redundant for you, but if you're familiar with the company Jornaya, that's how we originated. So Verisk Marketing Solutions is the combination of 2 businesses, Jornaya and Infutor. And we were both acquired by Verisk. And the combination of our 2 companies brings some unique capabilities. So first and foremost, our TCPA Guardian solution, which I'm here to talk to you about today, helps verify that one-to-one consent was given and allows brands the ability to create custom rules, which then they can make real-time decisions based on through their lead management system. The Infutor side of our business allows us to do things like complete fractional identities, append additional demographics, and even make predictions on which customers are likely to purchase which solutions from your organization. So these solutions combined together, PX plus Verisk Marketing Solutions help you make better matches, better bidding decisions, and then higher conversions with your customers. As you can see on this slide, Jornaya was first established, started creating the first lead IDs in 2011. So we've been at this for quite some time. And our TCPA Guardian solution was first born in 2013 and enhanced significantly here recently in October 2024. So how does it work? Well, if we take a look at what Boss showed on previous slides for PX, we simply live behind the scenes. We witness the lead event and we document what's occurred during the lead event, including what disclosure was presented to the consumer. Does it match the brand's approved disclosure? Was consent provided for a specific brand? And what kind of consent was provided for a specific brand? For example, did the consumer have to actively check that checkbox in order to provide consent for the brand? Or was the checkbox pre-selected for the consumer? And then finally, was that lead form topically relevant? We validate all of those pieces of information in real time, allow brands the ability to set custom rules based on each of those things, and then provide visual evidence in the event of a dispute they can use to demonstrate the witness lead event. This is a little bit of behind the scenes for creating brand name rules. So in this particular case, if you are a brand buyer and you're doing business with PX and they're making the best matches for your brand, behind the scenes in our solution, you can set specific rules that you can use to make real-time decisions based on the leads that you're purchasing and how you want to handle them. So for example, if they pass all of your brand consent rules and you know you have one-to-one consent to call that lead, you can quickly and confidently route that lead, make that call, and convert that lead to a customer. To reiterate there, the real power of both our solutions together is you have the opportunity to have a real-time solution to improve the matching of your brand to consumers, to ensure one-to-one consent has been provided, to have a visual representation and evidence of everything that was witnessed during that lead event so you can purchase and route leads confidently in real time.
Thank you, Ryan. I love this slide because it shows obviously what both companies are focusing on to address and to solve for. And I want to combine this slide and actually a different visualization that shows how the solution works so well together. Where this is the reason why we're doing some of these webinars together with Verisk Marketing Solutions, because we feel that the go-to-market on this particular product was so strong to focus on the brand explicit consent matching piece of PX and the witnessing of the actual event and the verification of that particular event through Verisk in a different way. So in this particular flow, you see the 3 steps one more time, where every universal lead ID would be able to witness the items that Ryan mentioned. Through PX, we have the ability to verify that the one-to-one consent was actually present for the particular brands that are being ran through PX, through the checks that we are integrated together with Verisk, and to make this a seamless process to integrate both solutions. Best way to visualize that is maybe even through this little visualization where the publisher would do an API request to PX for both bidding and matching reasons for one-to-one consent. The brands and all the information of the brands can be showed, including the logo, including description of the brand, but obviously important also unique dedicated TCPA. The brand can be verified in real time through Verisk that the brand is actually present. Based on that rule, a lead can be routed and posted to a place where prior express written consent is required. Such validations can also be shown obviously after the fact in terms of when that's needed for compliance reasons. So we're very excited about this. We're launching this integration shortly together with Verisk, where this is pre-integrated, where clients that use Verisk Marketing Solutions today can tap into this through PX as well. And I'm curious, Ryan, because obviously we've worked together on in deploying our solutions separately, but now also jointly. I'm curious in terms of where the adoption is of the one-to-one consent that Verisk is seeing today, and what you're seeing about the response from brands and lead sellers.
Yeah, well, adoption's ramping up quickly. So I think if we looked at things just a couple of months ago, folks were still trying to work things out. But I'd say with confidence right now, brands and lead sellers are adopting very rapidly. Each week, I have dozens of meetings with various customers. On the Verisk Marketing Solutions side, we've run a fast track program now for the last month, where we're providing white glove service to our customers to help them get onboarded onto our solution. That includes helping all the way on the publisher side, basically end to end, to make sure that our brands are up and one-to-one compliant now. And we're starting with mostly making sure all of the data is flowing and that all the questions are answered. So by the time January 27th gets here, not only are brands up and running with one or two other publishers, but they're fully up and running across the board with confidence.
Amazing. Yeah, we're seeing similar adoption now where things are ramping up quickly. And I think especially with CMS regulations that were required in the Medicare industry, where a one-to-one consent is required, regardless of the use of an ATDS or not, per October 1st, really expedited the adoption of one-to-one consent. So today, all lead forms that we see in the market for Medicare are on a one-to-one consent basis, and it can still be in different scenarios. It can be with the checkboxes. It can be with the exclusive model where the brand is being shown in the TCPA. In the next session in 3 weeks, we'll hear a little bit about those results. What we're seeing in terms of results when such a one-to-one consent is present is that the quality of that lead is so much higher. And we see clients that are seeing yields that are either 1.8x up to 2.4x higher than a lead that would just be in the standard TCPA as we know it today. And I think that's super significant, right? If that means that conversion rates are up, that means that consumer experience is better, but that also means that lead sellers can be paid twice as much for those leads if the performance is much higher. In addition, we see now that a lot of other verticals are adopting one-to-one consent. We see this across multiple insurance verticals, home services, education, and the financial verticals. I asked my team today what the latest count is, and we have currently 50 partners that are either live or in integration over 8 different verticals, which I think is exciting. But yet again, we're also only 90 days away today from January 27th. So when a brand will require one-to-one consent, I think the speediness around this and the further adoption in the next 60 days is key to make sure that you're dialing on leads that are fully compliant in the way how you need to see that. Michele, I'm curious what you're hearing from your clients today and what you're seeing in terms of the adoption in industry that you can share with us.
Yeah, I mean, our clients are moving forward with one-to-one consent, and they are, working to be very creative in the types of things that they are doing for one-to-one consent. And so I think every day we're being challenged to work with them to come up with these new and creative ways, especially for companies that are generating leads for instance, multiple contractors, maybe for a service or those types of things, and working with them on ways that they're providing a service and matching companies. So one of the ways that we're seeing it, we are seeing a lot of folks that are using branded web pages. They're using just the one-to-one consent with the plain language that we've been recommending for a very long time now. And they're just really working on driving traffic to websites. So, and then working to make sure that they have the documented consent to show to their sellers that they've taken those steps to have one-to-one consent.
Michele, what is your expectation in terms of what percentage of brands, and I'm talking about direct brands in industry, will require this? Because as you laid out earlier in the slides, if you don't use regulated technology, and as you stated before, if you are scrubbing against the DNC, and if you are following the regulations, a one-to-one consent opt-in might not be required. Do you have any idea of what your expectation is for the landscape of one-to-one consent if we're having this webinar in a year from now?
Yeah, so, I think there are a lot of companies out there that aren't using one-to-one or aren't using regulated technology. But, there's a provision in the FCC's rule that talks about consent for do not call. And the FCC specifically said, we are not changing the requirements for the prior express invitation that's required to call somebody on the do not call list without scrubbing against the national DNC registry. However, they also pointed to the fact that there were 26 or 28 attorneys general that filed comments with the FCC that said you don't need to change these requirements because it's already required. Because when you look at the language in the TCPA and the TSR about getting consent for the seller from the consumer, in the language they use some does, and as a result they're saying that maybe even potentially you need it for do not call. I think that is a push, and I do think that it will be tested, and you don't want to be one of those first companies that is tested, but just be cautious of it. You need to be prepared to be able to defend whatever it is that you're doing.
Thanks, Michele. We have some questions coming in the meantime. So as an participant or attendee, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to read it out loud because it's a long question. And this one is tailored towards you, Michele. You spoke about how verbal consent via phone call is not acceptable, despite the FCC saying previously that it is. In the scenario where a lead form was filled to give consent to a named company to contact the consumer, and that company then calls the consumer to obtain one-to-one consent for one of their dealers to contact them, capturing that verbally on the phone, is that not compliant?
You should definitely work with your attorney, but I would say that, if we look at that, there's one case out there, right? So we have one case in one district that is talking about this and having looked at e-sign. Having said that, e-sign specifically says that you have to get consent in writing in a non-electronic form to get consent, the e-sign consent, to provide those subsequent disclosures, here the TCPA disclosures, in electronic form. Now, in the scenario that you were talking about, if you're not using regulated technology, we go to look at what's required for do not call, and there are some exceptions for do not call. One is an inquiry established business relationship. And so, through this call, are they creating an established established business relationship through an inquiry? So there might be other ways to make those telephone calls without having to have that type of consent. And there are, as I said, other ways we're seeing people get creative with maybe sending emails or text messages at the same time, confirming the e-sign consent. But again, you need to make sure you're even doing that in the right way. Which is worth something I've been wanting to point out, because I'm seeing it more and more. When we're talking about the regulated technology, people will say, I'm not using pre-recorded messages. And then you start looking at what types of things they are doing. And then you find they're using a pre-recorded message for a very good reason, to provide the consent to record or monitor the telephone call that's being placed for quality assurance purposes. And so if you're using a pre-recorded message to get that consent or to provide that disclosure, then you are making a call using a pre-recorded message. So don't get slipped up on that. Don't, make something that wouldn't require prior express written consent now require it because you're taking that extra step for compliance. You're going to have to make those disclosures with a human voice.
That's a really good point. And thank you, Eileen, for that question. Great question. I have another question for Ryan that came in. Ryan, does Verisk have any reporting capabilities that can provide alerts on compliance issues as they happen?
We do offer reporting to our customers, but it's more in the dashboard sense. The way our solution is much more a platform-based solution. So we provide all of the outputs and all of the rule outputs that all of our customers kind of request and need, and you're able to make use of that information any way you see fit with your preferred lead management system or other solution.
And great to point out there, obviously, that we can ensure that if something is not compliant from a one-to-one consent point of view, that we can, through the integration with Verisk and PX, we can ensure that the lead would be stopped and not routed towards a particular endpoint with the checks that are in place. Question, and I think this one is more for Michele, but feel free to jump in, Ryan, as well. What key factors should I consider when choosing a solution for FCC consent? Great, high open-ended question, but Michele, from your point of view, obviously you have some preferred partnerships that you would recommend being on this call. But kidding aside, what would you recommend and provide as an answer to that particular question? Because it's something that I think is on everyone's top of mind today.
Well, obviously, would be PX and Verisk were doing an excellent job in this area. When we're talking about solutions, I mean, there's so many different types of solutions out there. I mean, we could be talking about dialers. We could be talking about how we're going to verify the consent, what type of, platform we're using to obtain our leads, to sell our leads, all of those different types of things. And I think you've had some great suggestions just on the webinar here. Always happy to talk to people if they want to reach out to me.
Amazing. And then there was another question that came in. That was as follow. Do you anticipate that the FCC, FTC, and any other law enforcement, such as the state attorney generals, may inquire about compliance? Will they have the authority to spot check telemarketers about their databases, lists, and other ways?
So in order for a regulator to start an enforcement action, they have to have a reasonable basis to believe that the company that they would be issuing either a civil investigative demand, which is just a subpoena, basically, to a company, they have to have a reasonable basis to believe that that company is violating the law or is assisting somebody in violating the law, because there is assisting and facilitating liability under all of these statutes that we're talking, or regulations that we're talking about today. So a spot check isn't going to happen, but what could happen is if a consumer files a complaint and says, I have no idea why this person called me, I did not fill out a form, and lots of consumer protection sections in AG's offices have complaint specialists that will send out inquiries and say, provide me with a copy of the lead that allowed you to place this telephone call. And if you can't provide that, then all of a sudden the AG's office has a reasonable basis for that. Now, I think one consumer complaint is going to lead to that? No, it's not. It's going to be those companies that are making, high volume calls, high cadence of telephone calls, and probably not providing the right disclosures at the beginning of the telephone call. All of those types of things that are going to be low-hanging fruit for the AGs. So for those of you that are following what's being said here and taking those steps, don't have a lot of concern, provided you're taking care of all those other types of things.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And that was a question from Jerry. Both Aline and Dave are have the honor to have the last question, and I'll point to Ryan for that one. Can we get the slides of this meeting? Is a question that was asked twice. So Ryan, what do you think?
I don't see why not.
Perfect. We can definitely follow up with an email with the slides of this meeting. Great interaction. Thank you for all that post your questions. We promised to keep it to 45 minutes on today's session, so I'll try to round up. As I mentioned, we have two extra sessions or two additional sessions that are planned. One in 3 weeks from now, same time, same day, but in 3 weeks, and one 2 weeks after that. The first session we will be focusing on having real life examples from lead sellers that have implemented one-to-one consent and that can share their best practices in terms of how to do it, or perhaps how not to implement one-to-one consent. And the last session on December 10th will be focused on brands, how they are planning to utilize one-to-one consent and require one-to-one consent, and some best practices on that. So without further ado, I want to say thank you everyone for joining today's session. Great content. As always, Michele, thank you so much for joining. Ryan, thank you so much. I'm excited to do 2 more sessions with you. And see you in 3 weeks from now. Thank you all.
Forward to it.
Thanks, boss. Thanks,
Awesome.
Ryan.